Manx Radio Podcasts, powered by Shaw.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Hello and welcome to the latest look back at Talking Heads. The island's stance on drugs, a major retailer taking over the Strand Shopping Centre, and the state of the island's pub trade were all up for discussion this week. Here's Stu Peters with more.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
Should the island fight hard and forge new alliances to be involved in any negotiations over the United Kingdom's breakaway from the European Union? Brexit was firmly on the agenda at an emergency meeting of the British-Irish Council in Cardiff at the end of last week. Chief Minister Alan Bell and his fellow BIC members lobbied British government representatives for Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, the Republic of Ireland and the Crown Dependencies for real involvement in where the UK goes from here. Should the Isle of Man continue to lobby to be involved in any negotiations over future arrangements at an early stage, or is it really a case of sitting back and waiting to see what the UK does next? Can we play hardball as far as our interests are concerned, or will we just have to make the best of whatever happens? Robin Peel called. I'm annoyed the island didn't get a chance to vote in the referendum. I know it probably wouldn't have made any difference to the result, but we would have been allowed to vote. We have the oldest parliament in the world. Now, I think we should go for full independence. I know it has its implications, but I think we should do it. OK, Mark says, in relation to the border between Northern and Southern Ireland, it's already been said last week, in fact, by the Irish Premier, that an open border will continue between the two countries. Oh, thanks for that, Mark. Good, I'd not seen that. So an open border will continue. I think that's probably good for everybody, isn't it? Stu, did you have a good weekend? Yeah, it's all right. OK, Brexit. I thought Scotland had to follow with England as Scotland's referendum fell through to stay part of the UK. However, I don't think both Scotland and the whole of the UK can have a second referendum, can they? Says Kev. No, I don't think so. I think that was kind of what David Cameron said to the Scottish Parliament. Hang on a minute, you voted to stay part of the UK and this is a UK-wide decision and you've therefore got to go along with it. I hope the island doesn't get involved in any consultations about Brexit. It'll cost a fortune. It'll still be being discussed in 20 years' time. The speed things don't get done over here, says Cliffy. Cynical. It's very worrying that essentially as a result of Brexit, the status quo will be ripped apart. The truth is that the Isle of Man enjoys the best of both worlds, free movement of goods, but with working restrictions. I doubt very much in the current climate we'll be so lucky in any new deal. What worries me is that the uncertainty alone is enough to cause economic problems, and this is already evident. OK. We're unlikely to get any favours from the EU as its attitude to so-called tax havens is well known. Mr. Bell, please calm down. We know an election's coming and after that someone else hopefully will be in charge, says Tom. How did you swing that around to that? Yeah, well, I think that's a lot of work that the government's been doing over the last 20 years to stop us being referred to as a tax haven. Transparency and all the rest of it, signing up to all these agreements with countries around the world. I think it's trying to distance the Isle of Man from being a tax haven. To be able to understand the depth of the issue, the Treasury will have placed a value of our exports from the island to the single EU market. Is this sufficient for us to be concerned, or can any potential lost ground be made up by individual trade agreements with EU members? Can you get the Treasury to give us this sort of information? Well, I presume that it's far too early to get that. I don't know, because that's the only trouble with this. I mean, it's all very well as chatting about it, but until the fine print has been worked out in this, as far as the UK's position, then the rest of us are just sort of hanging on the coattails, aren't we? So we can hope for the best, but probably plan for the worst. Stu, the best thing since sliced bread was the decision to leave the EU, says Mike. Well, it's going to shake things up a bit, Mike, isn't it? I was probably part of the leave camp to an extent. I didn't feel particularly well educated about this from either side. I didn't feel particularly well informed enough to make a decision, not that I had one to make. But I felt very badly let down by both sides of the argument about Brexit. But my natural tendency, I think, was to say, yeah, they ought to leave, and it's about time to shake the whole thing up and have a go again, because, Europe doesn't seem to be working in many ways. Best move ever leaving the EU, Sturgeon is a rabid droid. Oh, come off the fence. Sturgeon is a rabid droid who hates the English and shouldn't be given credence. OK, I don't I'll go as far as to say that. I'm now left wondering if it would be worth the government looking into how it would financially affect us if we were to look towards joining the European market ourselves. They wouldn't let us, I don't think. Do we have the right to join on our own? I doubt it. Could we? No, because we're a crown dependency, you see. We're not a sovereign state. Could we not get all the subsidies and grants for improving the road and sea networks and financial gains to be made trading with Ireland and the EU mainland while maintaining a right to immigration controls, says James in Ramsey. That would be a wonderful wish list. What would we give up to get those sort of concessions? But no, my understanding is that we can't negotiate on our own. Mike called, there's a precedent for all this European stuff. Why doesn't the British government get themselves over to New Zealand and Australia to find how they cope when Britain turned its back on trade with them in favour of joining the EU all those years ago? That's what happened, so what did they do? And in the Chief Minister's interview, he inadvertently talked the island down in terms of future investment, saying that the uncertainty could put investors off. Let's not talk ourselves down. No, you're right. But Alan Bell is usually really good in being positive, and his heart is clearly with the Isle of Man. And let's go to the lines. We've got Hans on. Hello, Hans.
My view on it is that we need a trade agreement with those 500 million people.
In Europe?
We can't have that there was a lecturer at a university that was saying under the elections, it was on Facebook, that I think it's 15 people that's unelected are doing 60% of the laws in Europe.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that people were so upset about, isn't it?
It is, and they don't know it.
Not elected, and it's just full of unnecessary bureaucracy and very expensive as well, according to the people who wanted out of it.
Exactly. And there's another thing. This lecturer said that they have already made laws, so we don't only have to have the national tax number, but we need an EU tax number in 2025.
Ah, right. Well, I've seen a couple of stories on social media about bullets that we've dodged by getting out of Europe. Whether or not they're true, I really don't know.
They are.
Okay. All right. You're fairly convinced by it then, Hans?
Yeah, because I can see the next two coming out is Denmark and Sweden.
Right.
And Austria, when they're doing the election, they have to run again.
Okay. Do you think the whole thing could collapse? Do you think the European Union could fall apart?
I said that before they did the EU, or before they
referendum,
they did the euro.
Yeah, yeah.
Because Greece was playing on the devaluation of the drachma every year, so that you just got so that they got more money out of it, that you came down there.
Yeah, yeah.
And lived on the devaluations.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for your call, Hans. It's nice to hear from you. And let's see what Malcolm makes of this. Hello, Malcolm.
Yeah, I think Hans is very well right about the collapse of the EU. I think that I thought this for quite a few years. Talking to some friends in Europe who live in France and Belgium and Switzerland, they're very unhappy with the EU, as a lot of people here were, of course, as well,
okay.
or in Britain. And they can, or for some time, they could foresee big problems with the EU and the collapse of it. But what I was going to say, before I listened to Hans then, was that Mr. Bell seems to be not being very positive about it. It's all, most of the things he says are could and would, but nothing really positive.
But isn't that just because of our position at the top table, as far as this is concerned? That, you know, all he can do is ask. He can't tell anybody what the Isle of Man wants out of this. He can only ask people. Oh yes. I agree with that. But it's that when he was interviewed by your girl earlier on, and it was just that he was sort of announcing to the Manx people it all could and would. There was nothing very positive that he was sort of putting forward. I think isn't that just pragmatism, though? Do you not think it's just, you know, a more sensible approach than saying, you know, this is what we're going to do, because he's got no way of being able to guarantee that he can do anything.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I know he hasn't. Maybe I'm being too critical about that. But there's another thing that I think has been said before about the EU and the referendum that it seemed to be that a lot of older people voted for out,
Yes.
and younger people voted for in.
Yeah.
Well, just having a thought about this, I wonder if it's the older people have had quite a lot of experience, myself included, of being out and knowing what it's like to not be in the EU.
Knowing what it was like before the EU and having 40 years of nonsense edicts thrust upon us, yeah.
Part of it, and maybe, dare I say, a bit of wisdom.
Yeah, maybe.
So that might just be.
I think you might be right. Thank you for your call, Malcolm. Nice to talk to you. Mr. Bell's getting stick from contributors again, I see. Whatever Mr. Bell's pros and cons are, I, for one, can't knock his work in the UK and further afield on behalf of the Isle of Man. I think we would be a lot worse off with other MHKs trying to put our side of the debate, says Alan. Thank you, Alan.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Is the impending arrival of a major UK retailer good news for the island's capital? The leader of Douglas Council has welcomed the announcement that Sports Direct has bought out the Strand Shopping Centre in Douglas, the whole thing, with plans for a new store and regeneration of the complex in the coming months. But the news emerged last week just before a UK business committee highlighted disturbing employment practices at the retail giant. So what do you think about this? Is it good news for the island's capital? Could a revitalised Strand Centre offer a boost to Strand Street and the surrounding area in general? Or could it have a negative effect? It all went wrong for me when Tandy moved out, I have to say. That used to be a good place for chaps to have a good nosy at all the latest electronics. This from Josh, he says, there are lots of problems with shopping in Douglas, the biggest being lack of free parking. Still looks run down if you look up higher than the shop fronts. Nothing looks worse than empty shops. Must be a way of forcing off and on-island landlords to keep these empty shops looking respectable. Let's go to the lines, and we've got our Ballasalla correspondent, David, on. Hello, Dave.
Stuart, I think one of the big things, is the employment law.
Yeah.
That needs to be sorted out. I think that Sports Direct is going to be a good idea for the island, although, as it has been said, it's possibly going to have an effect on some of the smaller businesses. But hey-ho, that's business. If they don't have Sports Direct, they might shop online, so
Yes.
we'd lose out anyway.
Yeah.
But I think one of the big things with Douglas, and this is where the council have got to get that act together. I've just come back from Douglas. There was a huge wagon parked in Strand Street, taking up both sides of Strand Street, and there were two wagons parked in Regent Street.
Okay.
Now, they might have been delivery wagons, Stuart, I'm not arguing that. But with those vehicles taking up the amount of space that they were, you're stopping people parking.
Okay. All right.
And my way of dealing with that would be to say, okay, all deliveries have to be made to the shops before 8 o'clock in the morning. The wagons can go up and down Strand Street, but they must be clear of all parking areas by 8 o'clock.
I think there are restrictions down there. I'm thinking back to when I used to do a bit of taxi driving, and I'm sure that you could drive a car down there after a certain time in the afternoon, after 6 o'clock or something
in the morning,
like
Stuart, they've got to be... But 10 o'clock is too late.
that. Right, okay.
People are about. People are in the shops at 8:30, 9 o'clock, and they want to get in and out of Douglas.
Yeah.
But if you've got big vehicles, big wagons and vans parked in the parking spaces,
Yes.
then there's nowhere for them to park.
Nope, fair dues. All right, thank you for that, David. Not bought trainers for 25 years or a tracksuit for 40. Nothing there to entice me onto the high street again, says Kit the other. Large stores employ many staff part-time to avoid national insurance. This should be sorted out before another firm uses the Manx government to subsidise their profits, says Tom. Let's go to the lines. We've got Vernon on. Hello, Vernon.
It's just in response to the guy who reckons that all the streets should be emptied of vehicles.
Oh, right, yeah.
Particularly delivery vehicles by 8 o'clock in the morning. I think he wants to go down into town and have a look and see what time the steam packet ferry comes in, because it comes in at about 5:30 in the morning. By the time the containers are coming off, it's anywhere between 6 and 6:30. So you're expecting the delivery guys to deliver their goods within an hour and a half. It's crazy, that.
Yeah, and I suppose it's got to go to a distribution centre and be
It's
split.
got to go to a distribution centre. And we used to have a very big shop, as I think you know, in Castle Street.
Right.
And we used to get our deliveries through by 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
And the wagons were out by 10.
Yeah. Well, thinking it through, I don't suppose that any business would want to have wagons outside while the shop's open, really. So it's in your interest to get rid. Yeah. All right, Vernon, thank you for clearing that up. Good to hear from you. What else have we got? Sports Direct coming is brilliant. Saves me bringing loads of things back for my grandchildren when I go across. That's from Di. Everyone has missed the elephant in the room. Will they be paying their taxes over here, unlike the rest of the big firms over here, says Dave. Well, some firms do pay tax, but a lot of firms, generally, Manx firms as well, don't pay corporation tax. So, Stu, I wonder if they'd bring back Tandy, the electrical store. I'd vote for that. I used to enjoy the Tandy shop. I'd never really bought much apart from maybe jack plugs and things like that, little components. But it was a proper sort of, when you were out shopping with the girlfriend or whatever, you could go up and have a look at Tandy and let them do the clothes shops. Always something of interest there. I don't know how much more modernisation can be done with the Strand Centre except fill the units, or definitely put an Apple store in there to get customers in, says Kev. There is an Apple store in the Isle of Man, or there's somebody that does that kind of thing, I'm fairly sure. Not an Apple store as such, but maybe there could be a minimum employer's national insurance contribution equal to that paid on the minimum wage, regardless of the worker only being part-time, says John. Maybe, yeah. People don't need much to moan about, do they? Yes, people buy online, but probably only on the Sports Direct website. Many of the sports shops, Intersport, have had people buy the Whatsits for years, being the only sports shop. About time they lowered the prices, says Scotty. Okay, what else? Previous caller who spoke about wagons blocking Strand Street needs to understand that to make all deliveries be up by 8 is nearly impossible. Boat arrives at 5:45. Trailers then need to be sorted. Then deliveries regrouped and dispatched. That's why the 10 o'clock limit is there. Good. A second point of view explaining why that works. Well, we don't mind these things as long as we know. And we've had 2 people now who know about these things, who've shared that with us. So, the next time I'm in Strand Street at sort of 9 o'clock in the morning, there are big trucks there. And I think, why haven't they gone already? Now I know about it. You don't mind as long as you know about these things. Stu, on reflection, a couple of local hardware shops disappeared on the arrival of B&Q. Peel, Port Erin and Ramsey of ironmongers, but not in the capital. I must deduce that the locals will have a bad time after this news. The cost of the new Strand Street paving is being abused by local carriers. Victoria Street's abysmal. Buses are having problems every day through deliveries. That from Colin. There's nobody in Strand Street. I can't use the word that you used, John. At the best of times for most of the year, let alone before 10 a.m. I know. I have the T-shirt of once owning a business there. Oxford Street rents without a Hebrides footfall. Well, yeah, that's the thing, John, isn't it? Retail looks so easy until you actually put your money into it yourself and you realise that it's not at all.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
You're listening to the latest Talking Heads podcast, featuring highlights from the programme over the past week.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
What stance should the Isle of Man take on drugs? The war on drugs is still a priority for government despite financial constraints, and many pundits saying it's a war that can never be won. Tynwald voted last week to receive the Chief Constable's annual report, which underlines a commitment to reducing the flow of narcotics to the island. What stance do you think the island should take on drugs? Should we relax our laws in relation to maybe some softer substances? Or do we need to tighten up even more on all illegal substances? First comment to Alan. He says, time has shown it's costing more money and it's harder to stop drugs and vice crime. It's about time that both were legalised, regulated and taxed. Interesting. This money could then be spent on cybercrime, an even more worrying aspect of preventing terrorism, as well as helping to pay for all the underfunded areas of policing. A lot of people who don't realise that some people who take drugs develop psychosis. This is from Rob. A relative of mine was affected. He's in his 40s now. Some people can't get back to work afterwards because the damage has been done. I think they should take a stronger attitude to drugs. Some people might be okay if they take them, but there is a percentage of people who aren't, even when when it comes to things that are seen as soft drugs. This from Pete. He says, Stu, from a personal viewpoint, I feel it's important that we keep up the fight against drugs and their insidious use. Yes, the war of drugs is a battle, but we must not give up on it completely like some people are advocating. Where on earth would we as a small island community end up? I shudder to think of the consequences. I think the Chief Constable's fighting on every aspect of policing with his hands tied behind his back. Department of Home Affairs needs to provide more to this already overstretched police force. Stu, regarding drugs, you only have to look at the problems major countries endure. It should be zero tolerance with minimum 10-year jail sentences for users and 25-year jail sentences for dealers. If these people can't function without doping up, then there's no use for them on this planet, says Mal. Mal. OK. In regards to cannabis, in some states in America, weed's completely illegal, no problem there, and it's boosted the economy. Most people who object to making weed legal are misinformed bigots. That just happened to be the next text. I'm not trying to say anything. Stu, I don't take drugs except alcohol. Well, there you go. But who says one thing's okay for you, but I don't want you to take that one, says Robbie. Stuart, I think we should get even tougher with the war on drugs. I'd even bring back the birch so we wouldn't bear the cost of jailing drug pushers. I also think certain drugs that are classed as recreational should be available on prescription under strict control for pain relief. Then the side effects can be monitored and people who do need it don't have to risk getting a criminal record to obtain relief. That from Michelle. Let's go to the lines. We've got Ken on. Hello, Ken. Good.
No, never been a smoker, but I don't think that matters. I used to work for an organisation in the UK. They used to arrest people as they arrived from foreign, take them up the road, magistrates' court, conditional discharge. What? Yeah. What? There was a whole, so they brought in, this organisation brought in a on-the-spot fine, which seemed to work, but if you didn't know the system, you thought, better off going up the road.
Yes.
Good to get away with it. So, now the Chief Constable, yes, used to wonder about people, and we used to arrest people when they were leaving the Isle, man, when they had a drug squad. When they had to keep the figures up, I presume, they arrested people leaving the Isle of Man.
I don't know. No idea.
Well, it was a total waste of money. People leaving and we're arresting them for small amounts of drugs. We don't do that anymore.
Well, yeah, but I mean, they might be coming back, so you need to send the message out, don't you?
Well, yeah. Well, yes. But the whole cost of it, the Chief Constable's right, perhaps we don't send them, but it's the whole cost of the judicial system.
Yeah.
There's whole lots of people employed by prosecuting people, keeping them out of court, and nobody seems to go to court these days and get sentenced straight away.
Right.
You know, I think there is some sort of judicial review, isn't there, coming up?
All sorts of things are up for review, I think, yeah.
Courts, but it should be legalised.
Well, all of it, or just things like marijuana?
Just cannabis.
Just cannabis, yeah.
You know, it's medical use. I don't know, in Holland, where I've been in a couple of cafes, I've never taken the stuff. The smell's enough to put you off, but not even the cake. But is there anything we can get, find out from Holland about? They've had cannabis legalised for years, haven't they?
Well, yeah, it's a strange legal situation in Amsterdam in that it's not legal as such, but
on certain things.
It's allowed, but I think it's one of those things that can be withdrawn fairly quickly if people abuse the system. So I think it's a bit of an unwritten rule there. But I mean, they're actually legalising it in various states in the US, so maybe that would be a better test market to look at to decide whether or not drug use goes up, whether or not it causes more problems, or whether or not it solves problems.
I don't know. I think Jervis Hilton's 50% of the inmates are drug. I don't know what.
Yeah, a good percentage, I think.
I don't know what percentage is cannabis and what percentage is, hard drugs. Which I'm not talking about hard drugs. I'm just talking cannabis, and then you get into the medical things about arthritis and things like that as the benefits. But
yes.
I don't know. I wish it's just somebody would grasp the nettle and come out.
Yeah.
It's the wrong time to be saying things that you think a lot of people won't agree with.
Well, was it Professor Nutt that was over? David Nutt was over a couple of years or so ago, and he gave a speech at the Manx Museum. I didn't get to it, but I did watch it on video. I think it was on YouTube as well. And he was all for decriminalising it, and says that the war on drugs is lost, and it's time for a new approach because the current approach simply doesn't work.
Oh, it was lost years ago. When they decided, rather than coming down hard on people who are using it, they said, well, we've got to watch them and see who they get. So we get Mr. Big further down. Before you know it, there's about another 20 people.
Yeah, and they never seem to get to Mr. Big either, is the trouble with that. All right, Ken, thank you very much for your call. Stu, regardless of topic, for example, politics, religion, football supporting, drinking, driving, smoking, etc., there'll always be the extremists or idiots who spoil it for the rest of us, says David H. Yeah, absolutely right, David. No two ways about that. And one from Jane, perhaps all addicts should pay for their medical treatments instead of the rest of us, having been offered rehab. Lots will say make it legal for medical reasons, but the medical advantages can be got from cannabis oil with no smoking and no high. So they don't want that, they just want cheap drugs. Tougher sentencing is needed, says Gary. Definitely decriminalise it. It'd save a fortune. Dodgy gear getting stopped, police resources, court time. A lot of good professional people use often and always run the risk of losing everything. Cannabis is addictive because of the additives, not the drug itself. I worked a long time in the area and the positives do outweigh the negatives, says Julie. Thank you, Julie. Cannabis, definitely decriminalise. Yes, we've done that one. And alcohol and alcohol-related problems cost far more than the cost of policing drugs. So make them available from government-licensed outlets. Maybe more research should go into finding out the medical benefits for a lot of chronic conditions of some recreational drugs such as cannabis. After all, we take prescription drugs of some sort or another for various reasons. Over 20 years ago, I had 2 epileptic seizures. After the second, I was put on medication, aka a drug, which I've been on with regular monitoring and no ill effects ever since. In many circumstances, what are perceived as harmful drugs can be helpful to those suffering life-limiting conditions, says Pam. Yep. Legalise cannabis here in the island. This is probably our last comment on this. Do it as a 5-year experiment. The government could then cream huge amounts of tax, wipe out the $500 billion debt the island's got. Tourism could go up 1,000%. MHKs could even use the extra revenue to solve the pension crisis and even keep their own huge pension payoffs. It would solve almost all the problems here on the island. Wouldn't cause many new problems either. Create more jobs and fill up empty shops, etc. Right.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Do pubs still have a place in today's society? Apparently beer sales across the water have increased in recent months, and we've apparently consumed 31 million extra pints. So-called off-trade sales, including those from supermarkets, rose by almost 5% in April to June. But there was a fall of nearly 2% in bars and restaurants, according to statistics from the British Beer and Pub Association. How's the situation reflected here in the Isle of Man? Is the pub trade holding its own, or have you stopped visiting your local altogether? The pubs are empty because of the price, says one of our contributors. I do a lot of travelling throughout the EU, and the island is one country where beer is more... there's only one place where beer is more expensive, and that's France. On average, the island's about 30% more expensive than most places. The cheapest in the EU is the Czech Republic, where a litre bottle of Budweiser can be bought in pubs for 40 pence. A litre of Bud for, that's what, 2.2 pints. A litre bottle of Bud can be bought for 40 pence. We've got to be fair to the licence trade as well here, in that, the actual cost of the beer, it's a bit like cigarettes and all sorts of other things like petrol. The actual cost of the product is fairly minimal. It's the taxes and duties and things that are put on by greedy governments. That's what puts the price up on these things. Robin Peel called. A lot of pubs in the Isle of Man need a complete overhaul. They really are in dire need of renovation. There's a real problem with the pub trade in the Isle of Man at the moment. Yeah, I would suggest, Rob, that the real problem with the pub trade is that they're probably losing money, or they're not making anything like the money that they ought to be doing, given the scale of the investment. And so you've got this vicious spiral where they can't afford to improve the places because they're not covering the cost. People don't go to pubs because it's too expensive, says Claire. And again, everybody's very quick to point at the brewery and say, it's them being greedy about it. But I would suggest that governments have got a lot to do with this as well. People don't go to pubs because of access, can drink at home, etc. People want to be able to drive everywhere these days. I believe the coffee shops have replaced the pubs as a new place to socialise. Let's go to the lines. We've got Gillian on. Hello, Gillian.
3 little points I'd like to make.
Yes.
The first one is that I think the reason why they are losing a lot of customers is because years and years ago, people used to go in and have a drink in their lunchtime.
Yes.
Now then, if they go back to work, and they have drunk alcohol, they can lose their life. They can lose their
jobs. You're right. Yeah.
Very much so. They're
very frowned on nowadays, that, yeah.
Very frowned on like that.
Right, okay, fair dues. Thank you very much, Gillian. Let's go to line 4. We've got Val on. Hello, Val.
I've got several thoughts on this one.
Okay.
I think we've become a bit like America and Canada and that, where people will drink more at home, mainly due to the cost, and also it's become sort of social now with sort of pizzas that get delivered and so on and so forth.
Yes.
And for big matches, people nowadays also have bigger TVs, and so often they'll all go to somebody's house. And,
there's no need to go and watch the big screen at the pub.
And you can watch it, and people won't annoy you who get in your way and so on and so forth. So there's that kind of thing, and it's people will often now entertain more at home and sort of things, and food, etc., etc. So I think there's that bit. But I think the pub culture in Peel is very, very good. And you only have to look at last weekend when it's the Viking longboat races. Obviously, everywhere was packed and that. But if you've got places like the Creek that lay on entertainment on the weekends, and obviously like the TT and all that, it draws people in.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the things there. And things like the White House on a Friday night with Dickie Kelly, etc. And people go and they want to be you want to be entertained and have something a bit different.
Yeah.
There's that. And also I think there's like Ireland, they're all ages in the pubs, and they mix more. Whereas I think in Douglas, and I lived in Douglas most of my life, I don't anymore, but there it's predominantly, I think, the financial sector, a lot of younger people there, and if you go in and, 40-odd, which I wish I was, then, you'd be actually kind of, almost, not an alien, but,
I know what you mean,
it's different. Whereas it's where you go in other pubs where they're all ages, then it's so much better.
Well, it always used to be the case, didn't it, Val, that you'd get pubs that were old fellas pubs, where you'd walk in, everybody would stare at you and you'd probably go again. And then there'd be young pubs. There was a good range of different pubs, wasn't there, years ago?
There was. But I think when it is more mixed ages, then it's much better.
Yeah.
But they have definitely had to, a lot of them, go into the food industry, because that's the way it is, to draw people in, and then people will have a few drinks and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And I think it's a lot more disposable income than there used to be. When you're younger, excuse me, you're going out, say, for dinner with sort of more or less, birthdays and certain celebrations, etc. But now, you do eat out so much more. Everybody does, you know what I mean? It's much more the norm, shall we say.
Sure.
And so, of course, often, you'll go to pubs and things like that.
Yeah.
So,
I think you're absolutely right about entertainment, certainly. Because the thing is, it's all very well saying you can buy stuff cheaper at the supermarket and go home with it, but you don't have the same atmosphere, do you?
No,
and that's the thing. And especially if you go into a pub in Ireland, there's always a band playing diddly-dee music and stuff like that in the corner, and it just makes you feel good about life, doesn't it?
Yeah, and things like, there's also, too, obviously they have karaoke nights and quiz nights and so on and so forth. I'm very pro pubs because I think it's just great. It's a great way of sort of meeting people and running into people and all that. I think men tend to go out and enjoy a pint for the taste, but females tend to go out more to mix. And mix and mingle, and I think that's why there'll always be pubing, and I must admit I very much enjoy the pub culture. And another thing that keeps people out nowadays is the social media. A lot of people now will spend the whole evening, on Facebook and Twitter and so on and so forth, and often they're even drinking at home doing it.
Staring at the phone instead of the people that they're with.
I mean, we only have to go in a pub or anywhere really, and everybody's on their phone, aren't they? Texting or doing the internet, etc. So that's kind of a thing that I think the youngsters now do tend to not go to the pubs the same as my age group, where we still tend to think often you meet in the pub and go on and so on and so forth.
I think you're right, and thank you very much for calling, Val. It's nice talking to you today. Margaret says, definitely cost. You can buy a bottle of wine for the price of a 250ml glass in a pub, and it's not even good quality wine. Totally understandable. Staff and overhead costs have to be covered, but that kind of markup seems totally unacceptable. Yeah, it is really down to the cost of running the place. Stu, I like to go to a traditional pub like one with an open fire and Sunday lunch perhaps, but pubs nowadays are all modern and have big screen TVs. Another reason is that I'm a daddy now, so money's tight and supermarkets have better prices than at the pumps, says Kev. Nappies don't buy themselves, do they? Stu, I believe that the extortionate cost of taxis on the island is killing off the country pubs. You can travel halfway across London for less than the price of a taxi from Douglas to Ramsey. That from Neil. I'm a long time out of the taxi trade, so I'm not sure what prices are like now. Dave called a few months ago. I came back on the ferry and I had a pint of Guinness. I went to the local pub in Castletown and the cost of the pint was 5 pence more expensive than it was on the ferry. The breweries don't seem to see that it's the price. When their profits go down, they put the price up yet again. It's not working to bring people back in. I was in the pub last night and there were 5 people in it. It's crazy. Yeah, it is. It's one of those sort of laws of diminished returns, I suppose. Talking about pubs, I'm a pensioner. I go out once a week. I live in Douglas and go to the Bridge Inn at Laxey, a fine establishment, may I say. On the bus, as it's a free house, not a brewery-run pub, and as I only drink Guinness, it costs £3.35 a pint in this pub and £4 a pint in most other pubs. That's a good saving, says Colin. It's a fact that smoking ban here has killed the pubs. The EU brought this law in, but France, Holland, Belgium, Germany, Czech Republic all ignore the laws. This time last week, I was sitting in a Paris Disney pub that also sold food, having a pint and a fag, yet Disney have a strict non-smoking policy, but they've realised that they have to give the public what they want or lose money. Okay, interesting. Stu, in spite of the documentaries about 20-somethings binge drinking on the streets of Newcastle and Liverpool, they are the minority. Oops, this could be judgmentally racist. Recent figures suggest that youngsters now are not consuming as much alcohol as 20 years ago, and that doesn't bode well for publicans. That from Richard. Thank you, Richard. Ken called. Half the Isle of Man is on medication, which means that they can't drink. My wife and I are. And seeing the queues at the chemist these days, there'll be a lot more too. 50 pence approximately a can of lager in supermarkets, £3.50 for a pint in a pub, no contest. Okay. Pubs need entertainment. We went out for a meal in Douglas last night and had a wonderful night after meal in O'Donnell's, where they had live music on Wednesday night. Well done, H&B, and lots of visitors and locals in too. £3.50 a can of lager here, but you can get it around £2 across. All right. Don't bother going into the pubs now as they're not homely, all tables and chairs restaurant style, more interested in food than beer, says Rich. They're having to adapt their business model, I suppose, for what's going to make them a few quid, in that people aren't just buying beer and drinks and things like that. And that's, I mean, the thing that would turn me away from a pub is children. I'm sorry, and I know that people think that children should be allowed in pubs. I really don't. I think a pub is the last place that children should be. I agree with Val. Peel is a great place. I wish Oncombe was a bit more like it. For such a big place, it could have a lot going for it, says Pat. I think it's a shame that people can buy booze and sit at home drinking alone, and particularly on the island. Pubs are very much part of the community and not for the alcohol necessarily, says Jan. And Jan says, P.S. I don't drink. I'm not very good at it, I have to say, Jan. A couple of pints and I've had enough normally. Forget smokers. We want to breathe clean air when we relax. Everything's come full circle. Pubs were on every corner after the war. You could socialise through sport. Stu, I'm quite prepared to take on the arduous task of testing the beer quality in the ambience of all the pubs and hostelries sponsored by Manx Radio, if that helps. That's from Steve. Good effort.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Should the island do more to help with the refugee crisis? Last month in Tynwald, Alan Bell said it could be disastrous if the island welcomed refugees here without a proper plan in place. The migrant crisis has seen millions fleeing war-torn Syria for a new home elsewhere in the world. And according to a major human rights organisation, the Isle of Man could do more to help. Patrick Corrigan from Amnesty International believes the whole of the British Isles has a duty to help.
It has been those countries, for instance, surrounding Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and the like, who have been really carrying the lion's share of this on behalf of all societies, all countries across Europe. And I think it is time for this to be more equitably shared. So we would welcome the Isle of Man stepping up and doing more, as we would with England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. I think there's more that we can all do.
That was Patrick Corrigan from Amnesty International. So, should the Isle of Man do more to help with the crisis, or should the island stay out of this altogether? Let's go to the lines. We've got James on talking about refugees. Hello, James.
I think we should keep our noses out of it. You look at the trouble that Germany's had.
Well, yeah. Yeah, that's kind of my feeling on this at the moment, I think.
We haven't got enough money to look after ourselves. And when I see the number of young men that are there, there's not so many. There's families there, but there's a damn sight more young men who should have stayed at home and fought for their cause.
Right, OK, well, that's definitely a point of view. Thank you, James. What else have we got? This from Norman, I think. Stu, I don't think the island should take in refugees unless they're to be financed by the UK government. We have long waiting lists for council housing, medical appointments, jobs, etc. Refugees sent to Scotland are complaining about their location, are they? Their religion and place of birth means that they'd be better off relocated in the Middle East where they speak the language and know the culture. Our government's cutting down facilities for pensioners here. Look after our own first. I can't disagree with any of that, to be honest. Stu, it'd be nice to see the wealthiest Muslim countries do a lot more and share the burden with the Christian countries, says Ray. Again, that's a comment that I've heard, that, why should the West be helping with this when there are so many places a lot nearer to Syria that seem to be sitting on their hands as far as it's concerned, and they are Muslim countries as well. So, but it's another of those things. It's a bit like the Brexit thing. I did say at the time that I didn't feel particularly well informed about it. I didn't feel impartially informed about the pros and cons of Brexit. And I don't feel impartially informed about the pros and cons of the refugee crisis and whether or not we ought to do more, or whether or not it is the problem that some people, again, people with a vested interest, there are some people who say that this is, it's not the refugee crisis, it's the crisis that's going to be caused by the refugees that we ought to be concerned about. And I honestly don't feel that I'm informed well enough to make a realistic decision about it. I don't know about you. Hi, Stu. With only about 80,000 people living in and on the Isle of Man, we could take in about 20 people, says David H. Let me state I am not a racist. A religious civil war is coming. Please don't assist it. No help should be given. That's from an ex-soldier. If the UK takes 10,000 refugees, their population will increase by approximately 0.016%. To have the same increase, the Isle of Man should take 12 refugees for every 10,000 the UK takes. That will not make much difference to the refugee problem, so why criticise the Isle of Man for not doing enough, says Mike. Stu, by all means allow refugees into the island, but there would have to be some sorts of means test which would prove that they could integrate into our community and prove beneficial to the economy from an employment aspect. It's our island with our rules and laws. That must be paramount before agreeing anything. Thanks from Steve. I'm getting sick and tired of these do-gooders telling us what we should do about the Syrian refugees. I think it was only a year or so ago that the likes of Ed Balls and his missus, plus many of the so-called celebs, were telling us that they'd take in families, etc. What's happened? Nothing. Nada. Zip. That from John in Farm Hill. I have to say that I agree with the person who forecast religious civil war. It has certainly crossed my mind lately, says Sue. Stu, great show as usual. I remember Winter Hill, Summerland disasters. I don't remember any Arab money coming over here to help. That's from Peter in Ballasalla. OK.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
That's it for the latest look back at Talking Heads. Our thanks, as ever, to everyone who took part in the programme. If you'd like to get involved in the discussion, you can call, text or email between midday and 2 p.m. on weekdays. Or you can share your thoughts on the Facebook page anytime. That's Talking Heads with Stu Peters. You can listen back to each day's programme in full using the on-demand section of manxradio.com. And the website's also where you'll get an update of what's being discussed on the programme each day. You can also keep up to date with that information by liking the Facebook page or following Stu Manx on Twitter. And if there's anything you think we should be discussing on the programme, let us know by emailing talk@manxradio.com. But that's it for now, so until next time, goodbye.
Don't sit in the slow lane. Join the fast lane right now with Shaw's all-new Superfast Plus broadband. Enjoy more bandwidth, amazing speeds and the best value on the island from just £23.95 per month. So don't be left behind. Get a piece of the high-speed action with Superfast Plus broadband from Shaw. For details, visit our stores in Douglas, Ramsey and Port Erin or click shaw.com.
Love being Shaw.
Terms and conditions apply.